Lanhee, welcome to the Armstrong and Getty Show.
Hey, Jack, great to be with you.
I just don't like all the exclamation points. Somebody talks about spending taxpayer money. It's never, ever, ever from the other side. Your comments.
Yeah. Well, and I think that explains in part why you've seen such a growth if you look back over the last, 2 years, a lot of people don't realize we've put $6 trillion of new spending into the economy in the U.S. $6 trillion. And at no point along the way did somebody stop and say, well, is that really going to be the best idea? What are the implications of it? Now, some of that spending, you can argue, happened, we're in the midst of COVID and, we needed to buy PPE and all this other stuff. Fine. So maybe you give them a pass for the first trillion. But then the next $5 trillion came along. And what happened? Well, predictably now, everything costs more. I saw a graphic that on the 4th of July, all of the things we needed for picnics, right? Hot dogs, ketchup, lettuce, condiments. The price on all of those things has escalated by, in some cases, 20 to 25% over the course of the last 18 months. And so the problem with all of this sort of free money kind of mentality that we have is that you're right. Nobody ever stops and says, well, what's the cost of it? And by the way, who's keeping accountability to make sure that the money that's being spent is actually going to where it's going? The school lunch thing you mentioned is really interesting because there was an expose by a great reporter named Susan Crabtree, who writes for Real Clear Politics. And she had an expose about, 6 months ago, where she found that what was happening with these free lunch funds was that they were actually going into wealthy school districts.
Yeah.
School districts where the median income was in excess of like $200,000 a year.
I got to interrupt you. So the school, I just got this email from my school. A house sold behind me, crappy old house, 1,300 square feet, right next to the school, sold for $1.1 million just the other day. And they're giving out free lunches 100 feet from that house that I'm paying for? What the hell is that?
Well, and it's like, if the goal of the program was to target kids who really needed the lunches, I think everyone would say, yeah, sure, let's do that.
I get it.
But there's nobody keeping watch. And this is one of the reasons why, people are always like, well, what the heck does a state controller do? Well, the reality is this is the job of the state controller, is to be the watchdog, to make sure that when we see emails like this, we follow up and investigate and say, hey, what's actually going on in that school district? Are the kids who really need the food getting it? Or is it going to a bunch of other people who, frankly, let's be honest, given their income situation, probably can afford to buy their kids lunch?
Right.
And can we better use those resources somewhere else to solve real problems like, homelessness, the crime that we see on our streets, all of the challenges that we have in our state with infrastructure? Can we address those? And nobody, to your point at the beginning of our segment here, nobody is paying attention to what the taxpayers need and want. And this is the problem we have with state government. It's the problem we have with the federal government, is that there's nobody there keeping watch, and that attitude and mentality has to change.
Is that something you would be doing if you end up being California's state controller?
Absolutely. The controller has the ability to look into spending at the state level or any local jurisdiction that uses state money. So school districts are a perfect example. We have had zero accountability around spending in our public schools. I just want people to realize how much money has gone into the public schools from the federal government. Now, if that money had gone to, help classrooms be safer for kids or making sure that teachers get paid what we want them to get paid, if those were the things that we were spending money on, I think everyone would say, okay, we can accept that money. The problem is, and I hear these stories from school district board members across our state, there is so much federal money coming in, they don't know how to spend it.
Oh, I'm sure. I guarantee you that's happening out of all the $6 trillion you're just talking about.
If they don't spend it, the money goes away. So they say, well, we got to spend it on stuff. We got to buy stuff. But nobody is saying, hey, are you spending the money in a way that is consistent with what the law demands and requires? Is it consistent with what's going to be best for our kids and our teachers and our parents and our families? Nobody's asking that question. And that's why the state controller's office is important. That's why I want to do it. And by the way, it is a watchdog function. And so you can't trust people in the Sacramento insider cabal to do the job. They're just not going to do it. All they're going to do is make sure their friends are happy and they're satisfying all of the other politicians around Sacramento. And that's why we've got to get an outsider in there. And that's the kind of background I bring to the job.
Yeah, well, I like that idea of state controller being a more emphasized office. I don't know if every state has the same role or they have different names in different places, but God dang it, I hope society gets to a place someday where we pay attention. We get our paycheck. You see the number at the top, that's what you made this month, and then you see this number, what you're actually getting to keep. All that other money, where did it go? What did it get spent on? Why don't more people care about that?
Well, it is interesting, right? We have a financial literacy issue in our country where we need to help people understand exactly where their money is going and what it's being used for. My son's 11. He's taken to biking around with his friends. It's the summer. Of course, that's what they do. And, they end up every once in a while at Baskin-Robbins. Great. So they end up at Baskin-Robbins. They buy a scoop of ice cream. And my son comes back and he says, I don't get it. The scoop of ice cream, it said, it was $2. But they asked me for, $2.25. Right. I said, well, yes, son, that's something called sales tax. And he said, well, why don't they tell you about this? And it's like, well, yeah, they do. It's on the receipt. But, yeah, I suppose we could do a better job of telling people they got to pay sales tax. But his basic point is like, well, if I knew it would cost the extra 25 cents, then I would have budgeted accordingly. I may be wondering where that 25 cents goes. And he's like, well, where do you think it goes, Dad? And I'm like, great question. Great question. I'm actually not sure where it goes. But somebody needs to figure that out. And this is the thing for people across our state and across our country. It's like, the issue we have is that there's no accountability for where this money is going. I think people would feel a lot better if we actually knew where the money was going and we felt comfortable saying, okay, let's determine whether this is a good use of spending or not. Unfortunately, we don't have that.
I don't know that there's any malfeasance going on here, but there's a couple of schools where I've seen them do, like when I'm playing at the park with my kids, do some paving jobs around the school that I think, why are you doing that? I don't see what the problem was. Or I feel like they're just trying to spend some of that money. That's got to be happening in various places.
Yeah, I think it is. And the problem is there are a lot of places around the state where we probably could use actual, paving of the roads or repaving.
Sure, of course.
And the problem and the challenge, again, comes back to all of this money has flooded into California, and they can't spend it fast enough. People wonder why we had $20 billion in fraud in our unemployment insurance system. I don't know if you heard about this rapper that got arrested. He basically was flaunting how he defrauded taxpayers in California. The focus of his rap was basically how he was making a living off of defrauding people through the unemployment insurance system. And the reason this happens is because the proper controls aren't in place. Nobody is stopping and saying, hey, does it make sense for you to give benefits to everybody, even if maybe they're not qualified? And nobody saw fit to ask these questions. And so $20 billion later, I want folks to realize we had a 3-cent increase in the gas tax on July 1st here in California, okay? For the amount of money these fraudsters took from us, we could have paid for 38 years worth of gas tax increase.
Wow.
38 years.
Wow.
And by the way, nothing to see here. You have to do something. Nothing to see here. The Democratic leadership in the state of California, nothing to see here. Move right along. Let's talk about.
Oh, don't go away, phone.
See here.
Okay, you're back. Sorry, we lost you there just briefly, and I understand exactly what you're saying. Nobody's paying any attention to that. Hey, I got to ask you a question before you go. By the way, if you vote in California, vote for Lanhee Chen for California State Controller. I mean, he's being endorsed by people that never endorse Republicans because we need that. Got a question for you. So polling came out this week. We've got the lowest numbers ever for belief in the institution of the Supreme Court. Congress is at 7%. The belief in the presidency, wrong track, is now almost 90%. How big a problem is this for a country to have those numbers?
Yeah, it is a problem when institutional people's belief in institutions gets eroded, like it's been eroded. And the Supreme Court is interesting. It used to have approval ratings that were north of 70 or 80%.
Right.
But like everything else has become polarized. Whether it's the presidency or Congress, it's become polarized. And I think it's a big problem for American democracy because one of the things that our democracy relies on is faith and trust in institutions. And it's very difficult to have that when everything has been so polarized. And unfortunately, I wish I could say that I saw better days ahead, but the problem is everything is polarized. I mean, I don't care what it is, even stuff outside of politics, social media and pop culture, everything's become polarized. So I do worry about that. I mean, an institution like the Supreme Court, it is their responsibility to interpret the law, to uphold the rule of law, to call other branches of government out when they cross the line, and they serve that function legitimately. And, I think part of the challenge is that people look at it and they say, I don't really buy that institution stuff anymore because I don't agree with them. And, the Constitution doesn't say that you believe in institutions when you agree with them.
Right.
The Constitution says, here are the institutions, here's what they're supposed to do. And we have a system of government that's worked for as long as it's worked because we believe in institutions. And so I do worry about it, Jack. I worry about where we're headed.
Yeah, I do too. And I got to believe that those numbers don't get reversed very easily. I mean, that would take years and years to rebuild that sort of faith in those institutions, which, I don't even know if it's even possible. But anyway, Lanhee Chen, candidate for California State Controller and all kinds of other stuff. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jack. Great to be with you.
Armstrong and Getty.